Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Let the sound of the bells fade into the distance. Tonight, we journey backward, far beyond the noise of modern cities, far beyond the hum of the electric world. We travel to a time when faith guided footsteps, when roads stretched across kingdoms, not for commerce or conquest, but for devotion. Before we begin, click that subscribe button if you are genuinely love listing history while sleeping. You may leave a comment. What time are you watching and where are you from, so we can align your time while you are going sleep. Let's continue. It is the 12th century, an age of cathedrals and crusades, of quiet faith and long journeys. Across Europe, from the misty shores of England to the sun-warmed fields of Spain, men and women set out on pilgrimages. Some walked for forgiveness, some for healing, some simply to feel closer to the divine. Their destinations were sacred: Jerusalem, Rome, Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, and countless smaller shrines along forgotten roads. But in truth, for most, the destination mattered less than the journey itself. As you listen, imagine the slow rhythm of their footsteps, the crunch of gravel beneath worn sandals, the rustle of cloaks in the wind, and the quiet prayers murmured beneath a sky untouched by modern light. Let us begin then with the first part of this journey, not in a grand cathedral, but in the soft morning light of an ordinary village. As an ordinary pilgrim takes his first steps toward the unknown, in the 12th century, the world felt a lot bigger than it does today. No airplanes, no trains, not even a reliable map for most people. If you wanted to go somewhere far, you had to walk, and yet, people did. They walked for days, weeks, even months, not for trade or treasure, but for faith. Faith was the heartbeat of life. Back then it shaped every sunrise, every mealtime prayer, and every tolling of the church bell. From the smallest village to the grandest cathedral, the rhythm of worship filled the air like the scent of burning incense. Picture this: a tiny stone church, surrounded by fields of barley. The morning fog hasn't lifted yet, and a handful of villagers gather for prayer, cloaks pulled tight against the chill. Inside, candles flicker, and the priest's voice echoes gently off the walls. It's not grand, but it feels holy, because for them, every breath is part of their faith. Life in the 12th century wasn't easy. People didn't expect to live long, maybe 40 years. If they were lucky, famine, disease, and war were never far away. When the harvest failed, people didn't just lose crops, they lost hope, so they looked upward, toward heaven, for meaning and mercy. The church offered both. It promised that even the poorest peasant, as suffering mattered, that pain could be turned into grace. In a world of uncertainty, faith was the one thing people could hold on to, and so came the idea of pilgrimage, a journey not just across land, but across the soul. To walk toward a holy place meant walking toward forgiveness, healing, and maybe a little bit of peace. Most people had never gone farther than the next village, so when a priest stood in the square and spoke about the road to Rome, or the distant shrine of St. James in Compostela, it must have sounded like another world. Some people felt the call right away. Others resisted me. Leave my goats behind. Who'll feed them? But the idea stayed. The road was calling. Sometimes the decision came after years of guilt, a sin carried too long. Sometimes it came after sickness, or the loss of a loved one. And sometimes, honestly, people just needed a reason to go see the world. Even in the 12th century, there were curious souls who thought, I wonder what's out there. Faith was everywhere, in the art, the music, even in the way people built their homes. Every town had its little wooden cross, its shrine by the road. Every city had churches filled with stained glass that turned sunlight into color, and you didn't need to go far to feel close to heaven. But somehow, it still wasn't enough. There was this deep human longing to move, to do something physical, to walk, to sweat, to pray with your feet. That's what a pilgrimage was, a kind of living prayer. You could spend months on the road, through rain and mud and heat, all for a single moment of grace at a distant altar. If you lived then, you probably knew someone who'd gone, or at least someone who said they had. Around the fire at night, stories spread like sparks. Did you hear about old Martin? He went all the way to Compostela, said he saw a star fall over the road. People would listen wide-eyed, imagining faraway lands with golden churches and relics that could heal. Even children dreamed of it, little ones tracing crosses in the dirt, pretending to be pilgrims with sticks as walking staffs. Faith wasn't just a Sunday thing, it was the background music of life. And for those who couldn't read, which was most, The church itself was a storybook. Every carving, every window told a tale. Saints fighting dragons, angels guiding travelers, the Virgin Mary smiling down with calm eyes. For many, these were the only colors they'd ever see in a lifetime. And somewhere in those stories was a promise that if you left your home, followed the road, and trusted God, you might find forgiveness, or maybe even a miracle. Now, not everyone thought pilgrimages were wise. Some lords didn't want their peasants wandering off. Some priests warned that travel was dangerous, and they weren't wrong. Bandits, sickness, and hunger were real threats. Still, the idea of setting out, of being a pilgrim, one who seeks, had a power no warning could stop. So people packed what they could, and went sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Farmers, widows, knights, monks, walking side by side. They carried staffs, wore cloaks with shells or crosses sewn into them, and left behind everything familiar. Imagine that first morning, the air still cold, the road stretching out like a ribbon of dirt. Behind you, the sound of your village fading, a dog barking, someone calling your name. Ahead of you, only the unknown. The world was wide and full of mystery. Every hill might hide a shrine. Every forest might hold a saint's story. Every mile walked was a prayer whispered to heaven. And though not everyone would reach their destination, the walk itself mattered. Every step was a kind of faith. In the quiet of a 12th century dawn, maybe you'd stop at a small chapel on the edge of the fields. A single candle burns inside. You kneel, touch your forehead to the cold stone, and whisper a simple prayer. Guide my feet, Lord, keep me safe. Then you stand, tighten your cloak, and take the first step forward. The church bell rings behind you, slow, deep, and steady, each toll marking the beginning of your pilgrimage, and the first beat of a story that will take you across a continent, and perhaps a lifetime. Soft music fades, the wind carries the faint echo of chanting monks. The road stretches ahead, and so begins our journey. Every journey begins with a moment, a spark that says, it's time to go. For a pilgrim in the 12th century, that moment often came quietly, not as thunder from the sky or a voice from heaven, but maybe while standing in church, or while listening to a tired priest talk about the weight of sin. The message was simple. You can walk closer to God. Literally, priests and monks often spoke of the soul as something that could be washed clean by walking to a holy place. Not everyone understood the Latin words they used, but the meaning was clear. Walk far, pray hard, and your sins will fall away like dust from your boots. And so the idea spread through sermons, through markets, through the quiet talk between neighbors after evening prayers. In a small village, you might hear it like this. Old Geoffrey says his cousin went to Canterbury, walked for 2 weeks straight, and came back smiling like a saint. Said his bad leg even stopped hurting. Stories like that had power, even if half of them were exaggerated, which, let's be honest, they probably were. Hope travels fast when life is hard. People went on pilgrimages for all kinds of reasons. Some went to say thank you. Maybe their child had survived a fever, or their crops had finally grown after years of failure. Some went to ask for healing their own, or a loved one's. Others went because they'd done something wrong and wanted forgiveness. The 12th century could be a heavy time to carry guilt, a stolen loaf of bread, a broken vow, a fight gone too far. All these things weighed on the soul, and the church offered a way to make it right. Go to the shrine, pray, walk until your heart feels lighter. There were also those who went out of curiosity, the medieval version of wanderlust. Life back then didn't offer much variety. You worked the same field every year, saw the same faces, said the same prayers. So when a friar came to town talking about faraway lands, mountains of Spain, golden churches in Rome, or the desert winds of Jerusalem, well, the imagination couldn't help but wander too, and maybe a small voice inside whispered, what would it be like to see those places myself? Of course, not everyone was eager to leave. Picture a farmer sitting at his table while his wife scowls at him. You're going where? To Santiago, for my soul. And who's going to feed the chickens while your soul's off in Spain? Even in an age of devotion, practical matters still had to be discussed, but once someone felt the pull of the road, it was hard to silence it. The call of pilgrimage was on just a thought. It was a feeling in the bones for some. That call came in the middle of suffering, maybe a long sickness, or the death of someone dear when the world felt broken. People looked for a way to repair it, and what better symbol of mending than walking, step by step, towards something sacred? To walk was to move forward, to leave pain behind. Every mile was like turning a page in your life. You might not have known what waited ahead, but you knew that standing still was no longer enough. The church, of course, encouraged it. Pilgrimages were good for the soul and for the church itself. Pilgrim traffic meant donations, offerings, and the strengthening of faith across regions. Some bishops even granted indulgences, a kind of spiritual discount on the punishment of sins to those who traveled to holy sites. In a way, it was the medieval version of a frequent traveler's reward program. The more devout your journey, the lighter your load in the afterlife. Everywhere, there were signs reminding people of the pilgrim's path. Painted symbols of scallop shells, the mark of Santiago, carved into stone walls. Wooden crosses by the roadside pointing the way to local shrines. Sometimes even relics, tiny bone fragments, or drops of holy oil, displayed in glass cases to inspire awe. And each one whispered, "Come, walk, see for yourself." When someone finally decided to go, it wasn't a loud announcement. More often, it was quiet, a night of restless thoughts, then a decision made by morning light. A farmer might rise before dawn, look at his field one last time, and say a simple prayer, "Lord, keep my family safe. I'll walk where you lead me." He'd go to the village priest, confess his sins, and receive a blessing. Sometimes the priest would press a small token into his palm, a piece of cloth, a wooden cross, or a small charm for the road. Then he'd return home to pack what little he owned, a cloak, a staff, a water flask, a bit of bread. No luxury, no map, no plan beyond the next sunrise. And maybe, as he tied his bundle, he'd smile, nervous but hopeful, and whisper, "Well, let's see what all the fuss is about." Once the choice was made, everything felt different. The village that once felt large suddenly seemed small. The familiar paths led nowhere now, not compared to the great roads that stretched to Rome, to Jerusalem, to Compostela. Even the air seemed to hum with possibility. Friends and family would gather to say goodbye. Some would offer blessings. Others might quietly shake their heads and say, "You're braver than me." There might be tears or laughter. And then, finally, the moment of final hug, a last wave, and the first step down the road. In that first step lived everything: fear, faith, guilt, hope, all of it bundled together in a single heartbeat. The pilgrim didn't know if they'd come back. They didn't know what the road would hold, only that it led toward something sacred, and that was enough. The sound of bells fades again, slow, deep, echoing through open air. Somewhere in the distance, a new pilgrim begins their walk. And maybe, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the soft crunch of footsteps on a dirt road. The rhythm of prayer whispered to the wind, soft ambient fade out, a monk's chant, a crackling fire, the low hum of peace. The road has called, and what better symbol of mending than walking, step by step, toward something sacred? And the pilgrim has answered. The decision has been made. The pilgrim's heart is set. Now comes the hardest part. Leaving and preparing for a pilgrimage in the 12th century was like packing for a weekend trip. There was no luggage, no ticket, no "see you in 2 weeks." This was a journey that could take months, maybe even years, and in some cases, the traveler never returned. So the days before departure were full of quiet rituals, both practical and deeply spiritual. First came the blessing. A pilgrim would go to the village priest, hat in hand, and confess everything and every sin, every wrong, every regret. The priest would listen, nodding slowly, maybe scolding gently, but always ending with forgiveness. Then came the blessing of the road. The priest would sprinkle holy water on the pilgrim's head and say words that sounded both hopeful and a little heavy. "May God guide your feet and guard your soul." Sometimes the whole village would gather outside the church to watch mothers crossing themselves, children wide-eyed, dogs barking at all the commotion. And in that moment, it wasn't just one person leaving. It felt like the whole village was sending a piece of itself down the road. Then came the goodbyes, and those were complicated. Imagine standing in a small dirt courtyard, your pack ready, your walking staff leaning against the door, your wife or husband trying not to cry, your children clutching your cloak. You try to smile, to sound brave. "I'll be back before you know it," you say, though both of you know that might not be true. No one really knew what might happen on the road: a bandit attack, a fever, or just getting lost. All real risks. So the farewell was both hopeful and heartbreaking. Some people even made wills before leaving, just in case. Some people even made wills before leaving, just in case. That might sound grim, but it wasn't fear, it was faith. They believed that even if they didn't come back, the journey itself would lead them to a better home, one beyond this world. Then there was the question of what to pack. Well, not much medieval travel didn't come with fancy backpacks or waterproof cloaks. A pilgrim's essentials were few and humble. A sturdy cloak, thick enough for rain and wind, a wooden staff, maybe carved with a small cross at the top, a leather flask for water, a satchel of bread, maybe some dried meat or cheese, a satchel of bread, maybe some dried meat or cheese, and, most important of all, a token of faith, a cross, a saint's charm, or a relic. That was it. No maps, no compass, no maps, no compass, just a heart full of prayers and a rough sense of which way the holy place might be. Local craftsmen sometimes helped. The village blacksmith might make a simple iron pin or badge to wear on the cloak, a tiny shell, or a symbol of the shrine they hoped to reach. The seamstress might mend an old cloak so it could survive one more season on the road. It was the community's way of saying, "We can't go with you, but we'll walk beside you in spirit." On the night before departure, sleep didn't come easily. The pilgrim would lie awake, listening to the sounds of the house, the creak of the rafters, the whisper of the wind outside. Everything familiar suddenly felt precious. The warmth of the hearth, the smell of smoke and straw, the sound of someone breathing softly beside them. There is something strange about knowing you'll leave the next morning. It makes even the smallest things feel sacred. Maybe they got up quietly, stepped outside for a moment. The moon hanging over the fields, silvering the path they'd soon take in the distance. A barn owl called and maybe they whispered, "Watch over them while I'm gone." At dawn, the village began to stir, the sky still pale and cold. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the road, not to celebrate, exactly, but to witness. Someone might press a loaf of bread into the pilgrim's hands. Another might whisper, "Pray for us when you reach the shrine," because every pilgrim carried not only their own hopes, but the prayers of everyone left behind. Even those who couldn't travel sent their hearts with them. A mother hoping for her son's safety in battle. A farmer praying for rain. A widow asking for peace for her husband's soul. The pilgrim carried them all. Before setting off, many pilgrims attended a special mass, a departure blessing. It was quiet and solemn. Candles flickered, the smell of incense filled the air, and the priest's voice rose softly. "May your journey be safe, your heart steadfast, and your soul strengthened by every step." Some churches even had special doorways called pilgrims' portals. You'd walk through one to symbolize stepping from your old life into the new. A small ritual, but deeply meaningful. The kind of gesture that made even the simplest person feel like part of something divine. Then, finally, came the moment of departure. The pilgrims slung their bag over their shoulder, tightened their belt, and took a deep breath. The air felt different, sharper, maybe, full of possibility. They turned one last time to look at home. Someone waved, someone cried, and then, the first step. It wasn't dramatic, just one foot in front of the other. But in that step lived courage, faith, and a touch of stubbornness. The road stretched ahead, dusty, uneven, unknown. Every sound felt new. Birdsong, wind in the grass, the distant bark of a dog. Behind them, the village slowly disappeared. And though they carried little, their hearts were full. They carried prayers, blessings, memories, and perhaps a tiny spark of fear that kept them humble. Because in truth, no one really knew what waited beyond the next hill. That was part of the mystery, and part of the beauty. As the pilgrim walked away, the church bell rang one last time, a deep, slow toll that seemed to follow them down the road. With each step, the sound grew softer, until there was only the whisper of the wind, the rhythm of boots on dirt, and the quiet beating of a hopeful heart. The journey had begun. Soft music swells, warm, steady, almost like a heartbeat. The pilgrim doesn't look back now. The world ahead is vast, uncertain, and full of grace. And somewhere, just beyond the bend, the road begins to teach its first lessons. The road stretched out before the pilgrim, long, winding, and quiet. It wasn't a road in the way we imagine today. No neat paving stones, no signposts or milestones, just earth and dust, rutted by wagon wheels, softened by centuries of footsteps. Sometimes it narrowed to a trail through tall grass, sometimes it widened into a broad path lined with hedges, and sometimes it vanished altogether, swallowed by the forest or lost among rolling hills. The pilgrim followed it patiently, one step at a time, guided not by maps but by trust. There were many kinds of roads in the 12th century. Some were old Roman routes, still solid beneath the dirt, cutting straight through the countryside, and others were trade paths used by merchants, monks, and messengers. A few were little more than animal tracks, worn into the land by shepherds or oxen. A pilgrim often didn't know which kind they defined. Each one carried its own rhythm, its own mood. The Roman roads were steady and predictable, almost comforting. You could walk for hours in a straight line, the horizon always ahead, your mind free to wander and pray. But the forest paths, those were different, cool and shadowed, full of whispers, the creak of trees, the snap of twigs, the flutter of unseen wings. They felt older somehow, wiser. You walked quietly there, listening more than speaking, as though the world itself were watching. Traveling alone was always safe. There were bandits in some regions, desperate men who waited in the woods for easy prey. There were wild dogs, sudden floods, and the simple danger of losing your way. But even so, many pilgrims chose solitude. For them, the silence was part of the devotion. Every ache in their feet, every shiver in the night, every mile walked, it all became a kind of prayer. Each hardship carried meaning. Still, no one walked forever without meeting someone. The roads of the 12th century were alive with travelers, not crowded, but not empty either. You might meet a merchant's caravan carrying spices or cloth, a group of monks chanting softly as they moved between abbeys, a night squire leading a tired horse, or another pilgrim, dusty, smiling, with a story to share. There was a quiet kinship among pilgrims no matter where they came from. France, England, the German states, the Italian hills, they greeted one another like brothers and sisters. They shared bread, water, and news of the road. Beware the bridge ahead, it's broken. There's a kind abbot 2 days north who offers shelter. Turn left at the oak with the cross carved into it. These little fragments of kindness stitched the long journey together. When evening came, the world softened. The air grew cool, and the sky faded to rose and gold. Most pilgrims stopped at whatever shelter they could find, a roadside inn if they were lucky, a monastery if they were blessed, or simply a patch of grass beneath the stars. If they slept outdoors, they'd light a small fire, not for cooking, food was scarce, but for comfort. The flame crackled, small and brave, against the wide dark of the world. Some pilgrims prayed aloud as the night deepened. Others simply listened to the rustle of wind through leaves, the murmur of distant streams, the gentle rhythm of their own breathing. And often, in that stillness, they felt something hard to name, not exactly peace, but a quiet understanding that the road was as sacred as the destination. There were times when the journey turned difficult. Rain that lasted for days, soaking every layer of clothing, mud so deep that the staff sank halfway down, a twisted ankle, a fever, a moment of despair that whispered, "Turn back." But the pilgrims rarely did, in part because they believed every suffering mirrored the trials of Christ himself. To keep walking, despite pain, was an act of devotion. And in those moments of weakness, help sometimes appeared, as if the road itself refused to let them fall. A passing farmer might share warm soup, a shepherd might offer directions, a stranger might simply smile and say, "Courage, friend," and somehow, that was enough to keep going. The pilgrim's world shifted with every step, from forest to meadow, from stone bridge to open heath. Villages appeared like mirages, clusters of wooden huts, smoke curling from chimneys. Sometimes the pilgrim would stop at a church or shrine along the way. There they could rest, pray, and refill their water. Some churches kept small relics, a saint's fingerbone, a splinter of wood said to be from the true cross. People would touch them with reverence, hoping for strength for the miles ahead. These brief pauses were more than rest stops. They were reminders. The destination was holy, yes, but holiness could be found anywhere. In a stranger's kindness, in a bowl of soup shared under a leaking roof, in the simple act of walking with purpose. As days turned into weeks, the pilgrim began to notice change, not in the world, but within. The first days were full of worry. Will I make it? Did I bring enough food? What if I get lost? But over time, the mind quieted. Worries fell away, replaced by a strange calm. You stopped counting the miles. You stopped fearing the rain. You stopped needing to know what came next. The road became your teacher. Step after step, it taught patience, humility, endurance, and somewhere between exhaustion and peace, you began to feel lighter, not just in body, but in spirit. At sunrise, the mist would lift, and the world felt reborn. Dew on the grass, the first bird's call, the faint scent of pine. Each morning felt like a blessing. You'd look down the road and whisper a quiet prayer, "Let me walk well today." And then you'd begin again. One step, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. Because in truth, that was what pilgrimage was. Not a race, not an adventure, but a rhythm. A slow, steady conversation between the soul and the world. Every stone underfoot was part of that prayer. Every blister, every drop of rain, every sunrise. And somewhere along the way, without realizing it, the pilgrim had already begun to change. Every pilgrim, no matter how devoted, had to rest eventually. Even the most faithful feet get sore. After a long day of walking through rain or dust, the thought of a roof, any roof, was a blessing. And so, every evening, as the light faded, pilgrims began to look for shelter. Some nights brought comfort, others brought well lessons in patience. In the 12th century, inns were not the cozy, candlelit taverns of imagination. They were rough, noisy, and usually smelled of something that had once been soup. You'd walk in and see a mix of travelers, merchants counting coins, peasants huddled near the fire, maybe a soldier polishing his armor. And then there was the innkeeper, watching everyone with the sharp eye of someone who knew exactly how to charge extra for everything. Beds, if you got one, were shared sometimes with a stranger, sometimes with several. You might wake up beside someone's boots, a chicken, or a snoring monk. Fleas came free of charge still after days on the road. Even a straw mattress felt like heaven. And the warmth of a fire, the murmur of voices, and the smell of stew, thin though it was, reminded you that you were not alone in the world. Not everyone could afford an inn, though for many pilgrims, the true refuge lay elsewhere in the monasteries scattered across Europe. The monks had a rule: let all guests who arrive be received like Christ. It was simple hospitality, born of faith. And so, when a weary pilgrim knocked on the monastery gate, the brothers rarely turned them away. Inside those stone walls, there was calm, a slow rhythm of prayer and work. Candles burning softly in the chapel, the gentle sound of sandals on stone floors. The pilgrim would be given food, usually plain but filling, and a place to rest, and a bowl of pottage, a crust of bread, maybe some ale or warm milk. Meals were eaten in silence, the only sound being a monk's quiet voice reading scripture. It wasn't a feast, but it nourished more than the body. It fed something deeper, the soul that had been worn thin by the road. The monasteries were scattered like beacons across the medieval map, each one a small island of peace amid the wild uncertainty of travel. Some had guest houses built especially for pilgrims. Others had infirmaries for the sick or injured. Many kept simple baths where travelers could wash for the first time in weeks, an act that must have felt nearly divine. Imagine the relief. Warm water, clean linen, a real bed, or at least a bench without mud. After so many nights under stars or rain, it was enough to make a grown man whisper, "Bless the Benedictines." But even without inns or abbeys, kindness found its way. Many peasants, though poor themselves, would take pity on pilgrims. They'd offer a bowl of porridge, a place by the fire, or simply space in the barn with the animals. The straw smelled sweet, the cows were warm, and the pilgrims didn't mind a few gentle moos. Children would peek shyly at the travelers, curious about where they came from. Old women might press herbs or bread into their hands with a whispered prayer. And though words often failed, since travelers spoke different tongues, the language of generosity was universal. A nod, a smile, a hand offering food, that was all it took. Of course, not every night was peaceful sometimes. The pilgrim had no shelter at all. They'd walk until the stars came out, then spread their cloak on the ground, and rest wherever they could under a tree, beside a ruined wall, or along the roadside shrine. The earth was cold, and the insects curious, but the night sky above, wide, endless, and bright with stars, had its own kind of comfort. You could imagine those same stars shining above Jerusalem, Rome, or Compostela. The same light that guided saints and kings now shone upon you. A pilgrim might whisper, half to themselves, half to heaven, "Keep me safe through this night." And then, listening to the quiet hum of crickets, they'd drift into sleep. The next morning the pilgrim would rise with the dawn, stiff but alive, a little hungry but thankful. If they were near a monastery, they might attend morning prayers, the deep melodic chants echoing through the hall. If they were in an inn, they might share a last sip of ale before heading out. and if they had slept under the sky, they might simply stretch, watch the sun climb, and whisper a soft thank you. Every morning began the same way, with motion. One step, then another, the road calling again. There was something humbling about relying so completely on the kindness of strangers. It stripped away pride and comfort, leaving only trust. A pilgrim learned that the world, though harsh, was also full of quiet generosity. That even in an age of war and hardship, people still looked at one another and saw humanity. Perhaps that was part of the journey's purpose, not just to reach a holy site, but to see the divine in the faces of ordinary people. At night, when the pilgrim sat beside a hearth or beneath the stars, they would sometimes think of home, the smell of their own fire, the warmth of family. But they also knew something had changed. Each stranger who offered shelter had become a kind of teacher. Each shared meal, a small miracle. The road wasn't just a test of faith, it was a reminder that goodness walked quietly among the world's dust and noise. And so, the pilgrim continued a little stronger, a little humbler, carrying not just a staff and cloak, but a growing sense that they were never truly alone. For wherever there was kindness, there too was holiness. For many pilgrims, the road began in solitude, one person walking alone, lost in thought. But the world has a way of bringing people together, especially on long journeys. Sooner or later, you'd meet someone walking your pace, heading your way, and before long, you weren't just two travelers, you were companions. It wasn't planned, it just happened, like most friendships do. At first, there might be quiet nods exchanged along the path. Then, maybe a shared meal or a borrowed water flask. Eventually, conversation began, slowly, like a candle catching light. Where are you headed? To Santiago. Ah, me too. A smile. And that was it. The start of something small but comforting. Pilgrim groups were a strange mix of humanity. A poor farmer from France might walk beside a merchant from Italy. A noblewoman on penance might share bread with a barefoot monk. Sometimes even children joined the road, or old men who needed to stop and rest every few miles. It somehow still outlasted everyone. The road was a great equalizer. Titles, wealth, and pride all faded beneath the same layer of dust. After a few days of walking, everyone looked alike, tired, sunburned, and patched together with hope and blisters. When people walk together long enough, stories start to flow. One pilgrim might tell of a vision that called them to leave home, another of sins they hoped to wash away, others simply of curiosity, of wanting to see the world before their time was done. There were also lighter tales. One man who had promised his wife he'd return a saint, but was mostly hoping to find better beer along the way. Another who claimed his donkey was holier than he was, since it carried him halfway to Rome without complaint. The laughter these stories brought was more than entertainment, it was medicine. Laughter healed the spirit, like bread healed hunger. At night, the pilgrim companions would gather around fires, small circles of warmth in the wide dark of the countryside. Someone might hum a tune, another might softly join in. Songs were as much a part of pilgrimage as walking. They kept the rhythm of the road. Simple, repetitive melodies, easy to remember, easy to sing even when tired. Some songs were prayers in disguise, some were travel chants, and some were nonsense verses about lost boots or stubborn mules. It didn't matter. The voices rose and fell together, blending into something ancient and comforting. There's a reason songs are called companions of the heart. On the road, they stitched people together. Of course, it wasn't all perfect harmony. Spend enough time walking beside anyone, and little annoyances begin to appear. Someone always walked too fast. Someone snored too loud. Someone insisted they knew a shortcut that turned out to be a swamp. But even in those moments, the bonds rarely broke. A shared hardship has a way of softening the edges of frustration. You learned to laugh at it, to forgive quickly, because in the morning, the road still stretched ahead, and you still had to walk it together. Sometimes, companionship went beyond people. Many pilgrims walked with animals, dogs, donkeys, even goats. The animals carried supplies, guarded at night, or simply offered comfort. There are old stories of dogs who refused to leave their masters' sides, even at holy shrines, waiting patiently outside as prayers echoed within. Imagine that, a loyal creature sitting in the dust, tail flicking, ears perked, a silent guardian of faith. Animals too became pilgrims in their own quiet way. Groups often formed naturally for safety. Traveling together meant fewer worries about bandits or getting lost. Someone could fetch water while another watched the packs. Someone could share herbs when sickness struck. Over time, these small bands began to resemble families, makeshift, temporary, but real. There were arguments, jokes, chores, and care. When one pilgrim fell ill, the others would wait. When one lost hope, the others would speak softly and remind them why they walked. There's an old saying from that time: a single pilgrim walks to God, 2 pilgrims find him on the road, meaning faith deepens when it's shared. There were even organized groups, pilgrim brotherhoods, who walked under shared banners or wore matching tokens. They looked after one another, prayed together, and sometimes had songs that marked them as a fellowship. When they reached a town, people would recognize them instantly. The dusty cloaks, the shells pinned to their hats, the rhythm of their chant. And though they came from different villages, they walked as one. Some of the best memories of the journey came from these companions: a shared loaf eaten beside a stream, a long joke that took 3 days to tell, the moment a stranger gave you their last piece of bread and you realized you would have done the same. Even silence became meaningful. After many miles, words weren't needed, just walking side by side, listening to the same wind, watching the same horizon. That was enough. When parting finally came, as it often did, it was bittersweet. One pilgrim might turn toward Rome, while another followed the road to Compostela. There were no dramatic farewells, just a clasp of hands, a wish for safe travel, and perhaps a small gift, a token, a coin, a charm for luck. Then one would fade into the distance, and the road would feel strangely quiet again. But the companionship lingered, not in sight, but in memory. Because once you've shared the road with someone, their footsteps stay with you, even after they're gone. Sometimes, at the end of a long day, when a pilgrim walked alone again, they could almost hear the echoes of their friends' laughter behind them, and it brought comfort, proof that the road was never truly empty. The truth was simple: no one ever walked entirely alone. Even if the body traveled in solitude, the heart carried the warmth of every shared smile, every story, every kindness. That was the quiet miracle of the pilgrimage, not just reaching a holy place, but finding holiness in each other. The Pilgrim's Road was not just a path between places, it was a ribbon that wound through every corner of creation. To walk, it was to see the world in its raw and gentle beauty, to breathe in the land itself, one slow step at a time. Every day brought a new scene, like the turning of quiet pages in a sacred book. There were mornings when mist rolled thick across the fields, blurring the world into silver and grey. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and wild herbs. Somewhere, a distant bell might ring faint and hollow, as if floating on the clouds. Pilgrims walked in silence then, the world softened and holy, every sound hushed. You could almost believe you were walking through a dream. Later, as the sun rose higher, colors returned. The sky spread wide, a clear blue stretched above green meadows. The hum of bees drifted between wildflowers. Small villages appeared like patches of color, red roofs, whitewashed walls, the glint of a church spire. Children waved from fields. Dogs barked. Some farmers paused from their work just to nod and offer a wave, a quiet blessing in its own way. It was easy to feel, in those moments, that the land itself was walking with you. There were forests too deep, shadowed, and full of mystery. Tall pines rose like pillars in a green cathedral. The air smelled of resin and moss. Sunlight slipped through in golden shafts that danced with dust motes. Every footstep was soft, muffled by leaves and needles. Birds called from hidden branches. And somewhere far away, you might hear the soft rush of a stream. Walking through the woods felt different, more inward. The noise of the world faded, and you became aware of your own breath, your heartbeat, your thoughts. Many pilgrims said they felt closest to God there, beneath the quiet canopy of trees. Then came the mountains, slow, patient giants on the horizon. They looked peaceful from a distance, but the climb tested every part of you. The air grew thinner and colder. Paths turned to rocky trails. Every step took effort, every breath a small prayer. And yet, the higher you climbed, the more the world opened up. Yudi stopped to rest and look back. See the valleys spread out like a tapestry below, rivers winding through the land like threads of silver. Some pilgrims carried stones from the bottom and laid them at the summit, offerings for safe passage or forgiveness. Tiny mounds of rock, each one a story, a burden set down. At the top, the wind sang. It rushed through grass and rock like a voice from heaven. and in that vast silence you could feel both very small and very loved. Beyond the mountains came rivers, broad and calm or swift and wild. Crossing them was always an adventure. Some had bridges of ancient stone, worn smooth by centuries of travelers. Others had nothing more than a ford or a rope stretched from bank to bank. Feet would slip, carts would creak, and everyone would laugh nervously as cold water splashed around their ankles. But once across, the relief was always the same, that light, giddy feeling of having survived another small test of faith. Some pilgrims paused on the far bank, turning to look back at the water as if to thank it for letting them pass. Here and there, the road passed by small shrines, simple wooden crosses, or stone chapels, no larger than a hut. Each one told a story. Some marked the spot where a saint had once rested or preached. Others were built where miracles were said to have happened. A spring that cured blindness, a tree that never withered, a hill that glowed with strange light. Pilgrims always stopped. They'd kneel or bow, whisper a prayer, or just sit quietly. A few might leave a pebble, a coin, or a sprig of herbs as an offering. Sometimes there'd be a candle burning, left by someone who had come before, still flickering in the wind, a reminder that no one truly walked this road alone. And then there were the plains open stretches, where the sky seemed endless. You could walk for hours with nothing around you but grass, the wind, and your own thoughts. Some pilgrims found peace in that emptiness. Others found it unnerving, the world so big, and you so small upon it. But in the quiet hum of those open spaces, something gentle stirred. The road, the wind, the heartbeat, all began to blend together. It was as if the whole world was breathing with you. Each type of land carried its own lessons. The forests taught stillness, the mountains taught strength, the rivers taught trust, and the plains, they taught patience. The landscape wasn't just something to move through. It was a companion, a silent teacher, shaping the spirit of everyone who walked its paths. At dusk, when the sun sank low, the colors deepened. Gold turned to amber, green to shadow. Birdsong faded, replaced by the chorus of crickets. Sometimes pilgrims would see a church tower in the distance, its bells calling the evening prayer. They'd quicken their steps, hopeful for rest, and as the light dimmed, small fires began to glow along the hills, travelers settling in for the night, the world exhaling after another day of walking. In that twilight hour, surrounded by so much beauty, even the weariest pilgrim felt grateful, not just for reaching the day's end, but for having seen the day at all, for having witnessed the small miracles of creation that so often went unnoticed. Because that was the secret of pilgrimage. You didn't walk through the world, you walked with it. You learned to listen, to notice, to move gently. And somewhere along the road, the landscape stopped being just scenery. It became sacred. Every leaf, every stone, every gust of wind whispered something divine. Every road in the 12th century led somewhere sacred. Some began at the edge of a quiet village, others at the steps of a grand cathedral. But all roads, no matter how humble, pointed toward a promise that somewhere ahead, holiness waited. To begin a pilgrimage was to join a great river of humanity, all flowing toward the same shining destinations. The routes themselves were as much a part of faith as the shrines and relics at their ends. The most famous of all was the road to Santiago de Compostela, the shrine of St. James the Apostle, in the far reaches of western Spain. In the 12th century, it was said that the Milky Way itself mirrored the path across the heavens, guiding travelers by starlight. They called it Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James. Pilgrims came from every corner of Europe, from France, from England, from the German lands and beyond. They crossed rivers, forests, and mountains, joining the road like threads, weaving into one great tapestry of faith. The French routes were the most traveled, each one beginning at a great cathedral. From Paris, where the towers of Notre Dame watched over the faithful. From Versailles, where monks told stories of Saint Mary Magdalene. From Le Puy, high in the hills, where a black Madonna was said to grant protection to travelers. And from Arles, near the blue waters of the Mediterranean. Each path met others along the way, all converging toward the Pyrenees, the great mountain barrier between France and Spain. There, at the Roncesvalles Pass, pilgrims crossed into a new world. The air grew colder, the language changed, and the road wound through quiet valleys lined with monasteries and stone bridges. The Camino itself was marked by symbols, scallop shells, painted or carved into stone, guiding pilgrims onward. The shell became a sign of identity, Many tied one to their cloaks or hats, a simple curved mark that told the world, "I am a traveler on the way." Villagers welcomed them. Monks offered bread and soup in exchange for stories from distant lands. Each night's rest brought a new circle of faces around a fire, laughter, songs, and sometimes tears shared beneath the same stars. The rhythm of the road became a kind of prayer, step, breath, step, a slow surrender to time and distance. Far to the east, another road called the Via Francigena, leading to Rome, the heart of Christendom. This route began in Canterbury, England, and stretched across the Channel, through France, over the Alps, and down through Italy. To walk the Via Francigena was to move through history itself. You passed Roman ruins, ancient bridges, and walled towns that had stood since the empire's fall. Every mile felt like stepping through layers of time, the footprints of saints and emperors beneath your own. At the journey's end stood St. Peter's Basilica, a vast sea of marble and light. Pilgrims climbed its steps with tears in their eyes, feeling the dust of months, sometimes years, fall away with each breath. Many said the air inside St. Peter's felt different, cooler still, as if the very stones had learned to hold the silence of prayer. And then there was the greatest journey of all, the road to Jerusalem. To the medieval mind, it was not simply a destination. It was the center of the world, the very heart of creation. The journey was long, perilous, and often uncertain. Pilgrims set sail from Venice, Genoa, or Marseille, ships creaking over turquoise waters, toward the Holy Land. They carried little more than a staff, a cross, and faith enough to face the unknown. Storms, illness, and bandits were constant threats, but those who survived spoke of the wonder of their arrival, of standing on the Mount of Olives, looking down at the golden city, its domes glowing under the morning sun, of walking the Via Dolorosa, the path said to be trodden by Christ himself, carrying the weight of the cross, and of kneeling at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where centuries of footsteps had polished the stone floor smooth as glass. Not all pilgrimages led across continents. Some were shorter, sacred journeys to holy wells, mountain chapels, or local shrines. Even within a day's walk, there were places believed to carry divine presence. A spring whose waters healed the sick, a cave where a saint once prayed, a crossroad where angels were said to have appeared. To a medieval pilgrim, holiness was not bound by distance. Even a short journey, if walked with devotion, could open the same spiritual doors as a voyage across the sea. Wherever they went, pilgrims were bound together by a shared purpose, to seek forgiveness, to find peace, or simply to see the places they had heard of all their lives in sermons and songs. And so, the roads themselves became sacred. Every path leading toward light, every bend in the road, a new chance to practice patience, humility, and wonder. At night, as the travelers rested, they would talk about the places still ahead. Some dreamed of touching the shrine of St. James. Others longed to see the relics of St. Peter or to bathe in the River Jordan. And in those quiet conversations by the fire, you could hear something deeper, not just curiosity, but longing, a yearning for connection, for meaning, for a sense that all their miles mattered. They didn't know it, but the journey itself was transforming them. Every blister, every dawn, every kindness from a stranger, it all became part of the pilgrimage's quiet grace. By the 12th century, these routes had woven Europe together like a vast network of faith. Merchants, monks, nobles, and peasants all walked the same paths, drank from the same wells, and prayed in the same chapels. It didn't matter who you were or where you came from on the road. Everyone was simply a pilgrim, equal before God, equal beneath the open sky. At sunrise, the road would awaken again, boots on dust, staffs tapping softly on the stones, a line of travelers stretching into the horizon, each one chasing the same invisible light. Some would reach their destination, others might not, but every step, taken in faith, was counted as holy. And somewhere above, perhaps, the stars themselves traced their own bright Camino, shining quietly, leading the way. When you walked as a pilgrim in the 12th century, you carried little, maybe a cloak, a staff, and a small bundle of food. But there was one thing every pilgrim hoped to bring home, a sign that they had reached their holy destination. Not gold, not jewels. Something far simpler, a pilgrim's badge. It was a small token, usually made of lead or pewter, pressed into shape with a saint's image or symbol. Tiny, delicate, and yet powerful in meaning. Each sacred destination had its own design. If you walked the road to Santiago de Compostela, he would receive the scallop shell, curved and ribbed like the waves of the sea. In Canterbury, pilgrims took badges shaped like St. Thomas Becket's face or his martyr's sword. Those who visited Rome might wear the crossed keys of St. Peter, and travelers to Jerusalem often carried a little palm branch made of metal or carved wood. Some badges were simple, a rough impression of a saint's hand or halo. Others were beautifully detailed, showing tiny scenes of miracles, angels, or shrines. Each one was a story, worn on a cloak or hat, proudly displayed to all who passed by. For many, the badge was more than just proof of travel. It was a spiritual shield, something believed to protect the wearer on the road home and in the years after. Pilgrims would touch their badge like a charm when the nights grew cold or when sickness struck. Some even placed them near their hearts as they prayed. There were stories, whispered ones, that certain badges had healing powers. A badge from the shrine of St. James was said to help ease fevers. A palm from Jerusalem could ward off bad dreams, and one from Rome might bring courage in battle. Of course, not everyone could afford the long journeys, so small markets sprang up near every holy site, selling badges to those who couldn't go themselves, a piece of sanctity to carry home. And sometimes, a traveler would bring extra badges for neighbors, giving them as blessings, or as proof that prayers had been said on their behalf. It was faith made portable, faith you could hold between your fingers. But badges were not the only sacred souvenirs of the road. There were the relics, pieces of the divine, tangible and deeply revered. Relics could be almost anything connected to a holy person or event. A fragment of bone, a lock of hair, a scrap of cloth once touched to a saint's tomb, even a vial of oil or dust taken from a holy site. These relics were believed to carry the presence of the sacred, not just reminders, but living connections between heaven and earth. Churches proudly guarded their relics behind gold and glass. Some were displayed in ornate containers called reliquaries, shaped like tiny cathedrals, covered in jewels or cast in silver and gilt. But others were humble, a small wooden box hidden behind the altar, wrapped in linen and incense. To touch a relic, or even stand near one, was said to bring blessings. Some believed it could heal the sick, bring good harvests, or grant forgiveness to the faithful. Imagine the moment, a weary pilgrim, after months on the road, kneeling before a glittering shrine, candlelight flickering on gold, the air thick with the smell of beeswax and myrrh, whispered prayers echoing under vaulted ceilings, and there, beyond the rail, a reliquary glows softly in the light, the bone of a saint who once walked the same earth, now resting in eternal peace. Pilgrims often carried small relics home, not the great, guarded ones, of course, but tiny tokens touched to them, a bit of cloth, a pinch of dust, or a thread from a pilgrim's cloak brushed against a sacred tomb. These were called contact relics, believed to absorb holiness through touch. People kept them in small pouches or tucked beneath their pillows. Some were buried with them when their journey on earth came to an end. It was said that even the smallest relic could light the soul's way to heaven. But there was also something quietly human about all this, something soft and deeply touching. Pilgrims didn't just collect relics for their power, they carried them because they remembered. A badge from Santiago wasn't just metal, it was the feel of the sea wind on your face. A scrap of cloth from Rome carried the echo of distant chanting. A little palm from Jerusalem held the heat of the desert sun. Every object, no matter how small, became a story, a reminder of faith, effort, and endurance. And back home, those stories were shared. When a pilgrim returned to their village, neighbors would gather to listen. Children leaned close as the traveler unwrapped a small badge or relic, holding it carefully in their hands, as if it might whisper secrets of faraway lands. The badge would be pinned to a wall near the hearth, or placed beside a family altar. It became part of the household's rhythm, prayed before, dusted carefully, cherished for years. Sometimes, even after the pilgrim had long passed, their badge remained, outlasting them as a quiet heirloom of devotion. In many ways, these humble tokens tell us more about the medieval heart than the grandest cathedrals. They remind us that faith was not just in the stones and statues, but in the small, simple things people carried with them, things made by hand, held close, loved quietly. There's something almost soothing about that, isn't there? That even in a world so full of hardship, people found beauty in the smallest signs, a shell, a sliver of bone, a scrap of cloth. Maybe that's what pilgrimage really was, not about reaching a distant shrine, but but learning to see holiness in ordinary things, in footsteps, in silence, in the feel of the road beneath your shoes. And so, when night fell on the pilgrim roads, you could sometimes hear the soft clink of metal, the badge swaying gently as someone walked under the stars, each one catching a bit of moonlight, glimmering faintly, like a prayer still being whispered on the wind. Every pilgrimage, no matter how noble or faithful, came with its share of trials. The road was long, and the 12th century world was not an easy one. But the pilgrims walked on, step after step, through hunger, rain, fear, and faith alike. In truth, part of what made a pilgrimage so powerful wasn't the reaching of the shrine, but the struggle along the way. Each hardship became a kind of prayer, each obstacle a quiet offering of endurance. The first and most common trial was simple: the weather. The medieval pilgrim didn't have waterproof boots or warm coats. A wool cloak, rough shoes, and faith were all they had to face the elements. There were days when the sun was kind, golden light glinting off riverbanks and wheat fields. But there were also days when the rain fell for hours, cold, steady, soaking through every layer until you could wring water from your sleeves. Roads turned to rivers of mud, feet blistered, and still they walked. Sometimes they would huddle beneath trees or under bridges, sharing bread that had gone soggy, laughing softly about how even heaven seemed to be testing their patience. Perhaps, one might say, the saints want to see if we can swim. The others would chuckle, not because it was truly funny, but because laughter was lighter than despair. Then there was hunger. Meals were never guaranteed. A pilgrim might eat well one evening, a monastery stew of lentils and onions, maybe even a cup of ale, and then go 2 days with little more than stale bread. Still, food shared among travelers always seemed to taste better. When one had cheese, and another a few apples, and another a bit of dried meat, they'd spread it all out on a cloth as if it were a feast. It was in these small acts of sharing that the road revealed its kindness. There were also illnesses, both small and serious. A cut that went unwashed, a fever caught from sleeping in damp fields, or something worse, a wasting sickness that came without warning. But even in sickness, the pilgrim found meaning. They believed suffering brought them closer to understanding Christ's own pain. Some prayed for healing, others prayed simply for acceptance, that they might finish the journey, even if slowly. Herbs were gathered along the way, thyme for coughs, sage for wounds, and mint for stomach pains. Monks along the roads brewed bitter medicines that smelled of vinegar and hope, and always a hand would reach out to help, one pilgrim supporting another, steadying their step. Sometimes that was enough. Then, of course, there were thieves and bandits. The lonely stretches of road, forests, valleys, narrow passes could be dangerous places. But in a calm history, we can imagine these encounters not as battles, but as moments of tension and faith. A group of travelers hearing a rustle in the woods, a flicker of fear, then the realization only a fox slipping through the ferns. Still, the story spread. Tales of robbers hiding behind stones, demanding coins or bread. Many pilgrims carried nothing worth stealing, perhaps just a staff and a prayer. Some joked that even bandits had mercy on pilgrims, fearing to rob the friends of saints. Another quiet trial was loneliness. Even surrounded by people, the road could feel endless and still. Days stretched out with nothing but the crunch of footsteps and the wind for company. Yet there was peace in that solitude. Some pilgrims said that in those silent moments, they finally began to hear the voice of God, not as thunder or words, but as calm within the heart. At times, the road simply broke the body. Feet bled, backs ached, sunburns blistered. But the rhythm of walking had its own strange comfort. One step, then another. A breath, a prayer, a thought of home. And somewhere between exhaustion and peace, the road became part of them. It wasn't about reaching the shrine anymore. It was about learning how to keep going, even when every muscle begged to stop. Then there were the storms, real ones, fierce and unrelenting. Imagine walking through a narrow valley when the sky suddenly darkens, the wind rises, the trees begin to sway, and the first drops of rain fall heavy as coins. Within minutes, the path disappears beneath sheets of water. Thunder rolls across the hills like a drum, echoing through every bone. The pilgrims would cling to each other for shelter, hoods drawn, cloaks whipping in the wind, and sometimes someone would whisper a prayer, not for safety, but simply for the courage to trust. When the storm passed, the world was fresh again, leaves dripping, rivers swollen, the air cool and clean. It was as if the road itself had been washed and blessed anew. And sometimes the dangers weren't from nature or thieves, but from temptation. A warm inn too tempting to leave, a market full of laughter and roasted meat, or even the simple thought, maybe I've gone far enough. But always, something called them onward, a bell in the distance, a sunrise over the hills, a feeling deep in the chest that the journey wasn't done. Through it all, the pilgrims learned patience. They learned to be still in hardship, to smile at discomfort, and to find small joys wherever they could. A patch of sunlight after a storm, a loaf of bread shared by strangers, a night when everyone sang softly before sleep. Each trial, instead of breaking them, shaped them, sanded down the rough edges of pride and fear until only faith remained, quiet, steady, unshakable. And when they looked back, months later, the hardest days often became their most cherished memories, not because they were easy, but because they had revealed something true about themselves, that they could endure, that kindness could still bloom in hardship, that even pain, when walked through gently, could lead to grace. So yes, the pilgrim roads were full of trials, but in the hush of those long days, between storms and hunger and aching feet, something beautiful was always at work, the transformation of an ordinary traveler into someone lighter, humbler, more awake to wonder. Because in the end, every struggle became part of the prayer, and every hardship, no matter how heavy, was carried, not alone, but together, under the same vast, forgiving sky. After weeks, or sometimes months, the road finally began to change. The landscape softened. Villages grew larger. The air itself seemed different, filled with a quiet expectancy, like the breath before a prayer. For the pilgrim, it was a strange, tender time. The body was tired, the shoes worn thin, yet something deeper stirred, a flutter of disbelief that the end was truly near. Then, one morning, as the mist lifted, there it was, on the horizon, faint at first, then clear as sunlight, the towers of the holy city. For those walking to Santiago de Compostela, the sight of the cathedral's twin spires rising above the rooftops of the old town was enough to bring tears. Some fell to their knees right there on the road. Others simply stood in silence, hands trembling, smiling through tears they didn't quite understand. Months of rain and blisters, laughter and hunger, and suddenly, there it was. The goal, shining faintly in the morning light, wrapped in mist and bells. No trumpet sounded, no angelic choir burst from the heavens, only the soft, human sound of someone whispering, "We made it." As they entered the city, the narrow streets were alive with movement. Merchants calling out in many languages, the smell of bread, candles, and horse dung mixing with incense drifting from open church doors. Bells rang from every tower, marking the hours of prayer, echoing down the cobbled lanes. Everywhere, you could tell this was a place built by pilgrims, for pilgrims. Guest houses, markets, chapels, and fountains, all meant to welcome the weary traveler. And yet, even amid the noise, each pilgrim carried a quiet hush inside them. That feeling you get when you know you are standing somewhere that countless others have reached before you, hearts full of hope and dust. When they reached the cathedral square, many would stop and simply stare. The great facade, carved with saints and angels, shimmered in the sun. The scent of wax and stone hung in the air, and through the open doors came the murmur of chanting deep, rhythmic, eternal. Some pilgrims entered on their knees, others kissed the threshold. Some pressed their foreheads to the cool stone and whispered their prayers through tears. Inside, lights spilled through stained glass like water over marble floors. Candles flickered in the corners, thousands of tiny flames offered by countless hands. The sound of chanting rose and fell, soft as breathing. At the heart of it all, the shrine. For those at Santiago, it was the tomb of St. James, a silver casket surrounded by carved angels. For pilgrims to Rome, it was the tomb of St. Peter beneath the vast dome. For those who made it all the way to Jerusalem, it was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place believed to hold both death and resurrection. Each shrine carried its own kind of silence, not empty, but full, a silence that seemed to hum gently, as if the walls themselves remembered every prayer ever spoken there. The pilgrim knelt. Maybe they prayed aloud. Maybe they simply breathed and let the journey catch up with them. Every blister, every ache, every fear, all of it felt worth it, in that one still, shining moment. For some, there was relief. For others, And for many, a strange sadness, a feeling that the journey was ending just as they had learned how to walk. After the prayers came the rituals of arrival. Pilgrims attended Mass, receiving blessings from the clergy. They washed in holy water, cleansing both body and soul. Some carried candles, some offered coins or locks of hair in gratitude. Many received a pilgrim certificate, a proof of completion written in Latin, bearing the seal of the Church. It wasn't just paper, it was a memory pressed into parchment. Some touched their pilgrim's badge to the shrine, believing it made the symbol truly sacred. Others left offerings, a small coin, a shell, or even the shoes they had walked in, a final gift to the road that had carried them so far. The pilgrims who arrived in Jerusalem faced a journey unlike any other. They bathed in the River Jordan. They climbed the Mount of Olives to watch the city glow beneath the sunset. They stood where, they believed, heaven had once kissed the earth. The heat, the dust, the crowds, it all faded when they entered the holy sepulchre there. In the cool shadows, the flicker of oil lamps painted soft halos of light across ancient stone. The sound of prayers in a dozen languages merged into one long hum of devotion. Some kissed the stone of unction, said to be where Christ's body was laid. Others pressed small relics or crosses against it to carry the blessing home. Many simply wept. It wasn't sorrow, exactly, more like release. The weight of the world lifted at last. And in Rome, at the tomb of St. Peter, the feeling was no less powerful. Pilgrims often described the vast space as a sea of marble and light, where prayers rose like incense to the dome. They touched the worn foot of St. Peter's bronze statue, smooth from centuries of pilgrims doing the same, and whispered silent thanks. Each holy place offered something different, but the peace was the same. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet, steady, and deep. The kind of peace that fills you slowly, like dawn spilling across a dark field. In the evenings, when the crowds thinned, many pilgrims would linger in the courtyards or sit on the steps of the cathedral. They would watch the sky fade to violet, the bells tolling softly through the dusk. Some sang hymns, some shared bread and stories. Some said nothing at all, just stared at the glowing windows and let the calm settle deep inside them. There's something beautiful about that image. Hundreds of travelers from every corner of the world, sitting side by side in peace. They didn't all speak the same language or come from the same land, but for a little while, none of that mattered. They had walked, suffered, and hoped, and somehow they had all arrived. And though the road behind them was long, they knew it had changed them forever, because somewhere along the way, the journey had stopped being about the destination and become something else, a quiet discovery of faith, resilience, and grace. When night finally fell over the holy city, the air was cool and fragrant with smoke from candles and hearths. A few pilgrims lingered in the square, gazing up at the stars, their faces lit faintly by the last glow of the cathedral windows. And if you stood close enough, you might hear one of them whisper, almost to themselves, "I am home." After the awe of arrival came a quieter time. The body still hummed from the journey, but now there was no more walking, no more counting of miles, only the gentle rhythm of bells marking the hours, the cool peace of stone cloisters, and the soft murmur of prayers spoken in gratitude. The 12th century pilgrim had reached the destination, but the pilgrimage itself wasn't quite finished. There were rituals to be observed and meaning to be gathered, not from motion, but from stillness. In the great cathedrals of the age, Santiago, Rome, or Jerusalem, the first act was almost always thanksgiving. A mass was held daily for the newly arrived pilgrims. They gathered together, barefoot or in worn leather shoes, carrying staffs polished smooth by their palms. The air was thick with incense, sunlight spilling through narrow windows in gold and dust. The voices of the clergy rose and fell in chant, slow, resonant, ancient. Each word seemed to hang in the air for a long time before fading. At the altar, the priest would bless the pilgrims. "May your journey bear fruit in faith and peace." And the crowd would murmur an amen that trembled softly, like a breeze through leaves. For many, there was also the act of confession. Some had sinned on the road, stealing food, breaking a vow, or speaking in anger. Others carried guilt from long before the journey began. They would kneel before a priest and whisper their confessions, their voices barely above a breath. And when forgiveness was spoken, it wasn't just words. It was release, a letting go of all the things they'd carried besides their packs. A pilgrim might leave that chapel feeling lighter than they had in years. Then came the ritual cleansing. For those in Santiago, a fountain flowed outside the cathedral where pilgrims washed their faces and hands. In Rome, holy water was sprinkled across the crowd, the droplets catching the light like stars. In Jerusalem, some bathed in the Jordan River, believing it to renew both body and spirit. The act itself was simple, but profound, a return to purity. Water had carried them across rivers and rain. Now it symbolically washed away the dust of the road. After the cleansing came the souvenir of faith, the pilgrim's badge. In Santiago, it was a scallop shell. In Rome, a small lead medallion bearing the keys of St. Peter. In Jerusalem, a cross made from olive wood or lead, blessed by a priest. These were not decorations, but declarations. They told the world that this traveler had walked the sacred miles and touched the holy threshold. Pilgrims wore them on their cloaks, hats, or staffs, proud, humble emblems of endurance and devotion. Some pilgrims also took part in rites of offering. They might leave behind a token, a coin, a candle, a piece of jewelry, as a gesture of thanks. Sometimes it was something deeply personal, a ring, a lock of hair, or even a small letter folded tight and hidden beneath a stone. Each gift was private, intimate, a way of saying, "This is what I give back." The cathedral floors and altars quietly collected these traces of countless lives, each one a story of hope, pain, and renewal. Even the clergy had special prayers for pilgrims preparing to return home. A gentle benediction was read aloud. "Go forth in peace, you who have seen the house of the Lord. May your road be safe, and your heart remain ever on pilgrimage." The words echoed softly, and for many, it was then that the tears finally came, not of sadness, but of fullness, a recognition that something sacred had changed within them. In the days following their arrival, some pilgrims lingered. They walked the streets slowly, visiting smaller chapels and shrines. They watched candle flames tremble in the still air. They shared bread and stories with others. Tales of storms survived, kindnesses received, dreams that led them this far. There was a peace in that waiting. No urgency now, no goal but rest. Some said it felt as though time itself slowed, wrapping them in a soft, holy quiet. In Jerusalem, pilgrims often spent their final evening at the Mount of Olives. From there, they could see the whole city, golden and silent beneath the stars. They sang hymns and prayed by starlight, the cool desert wind stirring their cloaks. Many said it was in that moment, looking down upon the holy city, that they truly understood what the pilgrimage had meant. It was not just a journey of distance, it was a journey inward. And then, when all prayers were spoken and all candles burned low, came the moment of farewell. The pilgrim would take one last look at the cathedral, the holy relic, the sacred stones. They would touch the wall, cold, ancient, eternal, and whisper a final word of thanks. The road had given them something no coin could buy: peace, a sense of belonging in the vast, quiet rhythm of the world. As night fell, the bells tolled once more. Pilgrims drifted to sleep beneath wooden roofs or starlit skies, their bodies still, their hearts untroubled. Some dreamt of the journey home, others dreamt of rivers, of paths winding endlessly under a silver moon, and some dreamt of nothing at all, only the deep, perfect silence of completion. Because in truth, a pilgrimage never truly ends. The steps may stop, but the spirit keeps walking quietly, faithfully, through the landscape of one's soul. And in that stillness, that gentle space between departure and return, the pilgrim finally found what they had sought all along: peace. Leaving a holy place was never easy. After weeks, or months, or even years on the road, the destination had become a kind of world in itself, full of prayer, song, and the gentle hush of sacred spaces. And now, to walk away from it all, felt strangely quiet. The 12th century pilgrim would often turn back once or twice, taking a final look at the towers of the cathedral, their peaks glowing golden in the sun. A deep breath, a small prayer of thanks, and then, with staff in hand and the creak of leather shoes, the road called once more. The journey home was slower, not because of exhaustion, though the body certainly felt it, but because there was no more hurry, no destination pulling at the heart, no imagined finish line ahead. Now the pilgrim simply walked for the sake of walking. Each village passed felt familiar yet different. The same winding paths, but now they carried the scent of memory, the sound of laughter from inns, the shimmer of water in roadside wells, the kindness of strangers remembered. Many pilgrims wrote, or later told others, that the way back felt lighter. The burdens they had carried, guilt, worry, longing, had been left at the altar. All that remained was peace. Even the hardships seemed gentler now. A sudden rain shower was just rain, not a trial. An empty stomach was an invitation to fast, not to fear. A muddy road was simply the earth reminding them to slow down. One could say the pilgrims walked home like people who had finally learned to listen to silence, and they were not alone. Pilgrims often formed companionships on the way back, walking with others who had shared the same destination. They became small, moving families of sorts, walking, singing, sometimes arguing softly about whose path was shorter or whose bread was stouter. They told stories of miracles, near misses and kindnesses along the way. Someone would always start a hymn, and others would join in, voices blending into something soft and unplanned, half song, half prayer. One can almost hear it, a gentle chant rising and falling with the rhythm of footsteps, a traveling harmony beneath the open sky. Back in the villages they'd passed before, people recognized the badges pinned to their cloaks, the scallop shells, or the tiny lead tokens. These symbols spoke louder than words. This one had reached Santiago. That one had stood before St. Peter's tomb. That one had walked through Jerusalem's holy streets. Doors opened to them more easily now. Strangers offered warm stew or a place by the fire. Children asked to touch the badges, as if by doing so they might feel a spark of holiness. The pilgrims smiled and told stories in return. Tales not of glory, but of humility, of sleeping in barns, of sore feet, of the moments when faith alone kept them going. Some pilgrims, having nothing left to rush toward, would take detours on the way home, visiting other shrines, monasteries, or even old friends made along the road. It was as if the world itself had become a series of small holy places. At times they would stop by rivers or fields simply to rest and watch the wind move through grass. No prayers, no destination, just being still and alive and thankful. For those traveling by sea, the voyage back was often unpredictable. Winds could change, storms could rise, and a journey that took days could stretch into weeks. But even there, amid the creaking of the ship and the endless roll of waves, pilgrims found calm. They had seen too much, prayed too deeply, to be easily shaken. They would watch the horizon in silence, tracing the play of light over the water, a moving prayer in itself. Back home, word of a pilgrim's return spread quickly. Families gathered, neighbors appeared, even priests came to bless the one who had returned. It wasn't just a homecoming, it was a celebration of survival and faith. Imagine the scene: a small village square, smoke rising from chimneys, children running to greet a dusty traveler with wide eyes, someone laughing softly, "We thought you'd never make it back," and the pilgrim, smiling, replies, "Neither did I that first meal at home. Warm bread, thick stew." The sound of familiar voices must have felt like heaven itself. But beneath all the joy, there was also a quiet change that others noticed. The pilgrim was different, calmer, slower to speak, quicker to forgive. When storms came, they didn't panic. When others quarreled, they simply smiled and said, "It will pass." Some continued to wear their badges long after their journey ended, not as trophies, but as reminders of what they had endured and of the peace they had found. For others, returning home was more complicated. The ordinary world could feel strangely loud after so much silence. The rhythms of daily life, markets, gossip, work, all seemed a little unreal. It took time to adjust, to find a place again among familiar walls and faces. Some pilgrims even longed for the road once more, dreaming of distant bells and open skies, and a few, unable to settle, did it all again, setting off once more for another sacred place, as if they had left part of their souls somewhere along the path. Yet for most, the pilgrimage never truly ended. They carried it inside them, in their prayers, in their patience, in the way they looked at the world. To have walked so far for something unseen changed how they saw everything. The road had taught them that holiness wasn't always found at the destination, but often in the walking itself, in the dust, the laughter, the aching feet, and the small mercies of strangers. As evening fell and candles were lit in homes once more, the pilgrim would sometimes look at the horizon and whisper a prayer, not of asking, but of gratitude. They had left home seeking God, and somehow, somewhere along the way, they had found a piece of Him in every mile, every dawn, every shared meal, and every quiet night beneath the stars. Centuries later, the pilgrim's footsteps are long gone, washed away by time and weather, but their paths, their paths still remain. They run beneath highways and railroads now, sometimes hidden under grass and gravel. But if you walk them slowly enough and quietly enough, you might still feel something ancient beneath your feet, a kind of memory, a hum in the ground. The 12th century pilgrimages didn't just change the people who walked them, they changed the world around them. Everywhere pilgrims traveled, the world had to adapt. Villages grew beside the roads, inns and taverns popped up where before there had been only empty fields. Farmers began selling food to travelers. Blacksmiths made more shoes for horses and for tired feet, and little by little, the dusty paths became lifelines of trade and culture. A baker in northern France might learn a recipe from a traveler heading south. A mason in Spain might build a church modeled after one he'd seen in Italy. Ideas, stories, and even jokes traveled the same roads as the pilgrims. You could say Europe was quietly knitting itself together, one humble journey at a time. Monasteries too played their part. Scattered like stars across the continent, there were places of rest, refuge, and learning. Pilgrims would stop at them to eat, sleep, and pray. And in turn, the monks who welcomed them began to write about their travels, recording the sights, customs, and beliefs of distant lands. Those quiet notes, copied in candlelight, became the first travel guides of history. They told future pilgrims where to go, what rivers to avoid, and which abbots were generous with the soup. Simple words, but powerful ones, connecting generations across centuries. And it wasn't just the roads or the records. Pilgrimage changed architecture too. Churches along the great routes began to grow taller, grander, filled with light. Builders learned from one another, Gothic arches rising in one land, then spreading like ripples across another. Some cathedrals even designed special doors just for pilgrims, marked with carvings of shells, crosses, or angels pointing the way. If you ever visit one of these old churches, you can almost imagine them. Dusty travelers filing in, singing softly, setting down their staffs, eyes wide with wonder at the stone and the color and the sound of holy music echoing high above. In time, entire economies grew from the flow of pilgrims. Markets were held near shrines, trading not only relics and food, but fabrics, coins, and spices. Seas were crossed, roads were improved, bridges were built, all to serve those endless feet on their sacred mission. And yet, for all its bustling activity, the heart of pilgrimage remained simple. The act of walking with purpose, of moving forward, step by step, toward something greater than yourself. The pilgrim roads also became a bridge between cultures. People who would never otherwise have met, peasants from England, nobles from France, monks from Italy, all found themselves eating at the same table, praying in the same chapel, helping one another over the same muddy hill. They exchanged not only goods but understanding, a shared sense that, beneath the differences of language and dress, everyone was walking toward the same light. And that idea that quiet, human connection would outlive the Middle Ages themselves. In a way, the pilgrim routes became the medieval version of the internet. Information, ideas, and inventions flowed along them like messages through invisible threads. Music spread, new foods appeared, medical knowledge traveled, even art changed the faces of saints, and paintings began to look less local, more universal. All because people walked. Some historians say that without those pilgrim roads, the Renaissance might never have happened, that the world learned to share because pilgrims taught it how, one humble traveler at a time. Even today, you can still walk many of those same paths. The Camino de Santiago in Spain, for example, has been walked for over 1,000 years. Some walk it for faith, some for peace, some just to listen to the rhythm of their own footsteps. But all find something of what those medieval travelers once knew, that there is a quiet wisdom in the journey itself. If you've ever gone on a long walk alone, just you, the road, and the sound of your breath, you've felt a little of what they did. That steady calm, that sense that you're both going somewhere, and already there. And so, the legacy of pilgrimage isn't just carved in stone or written in old books. It lives in every person who sets out on a journey for meaning, whether across a continent or just across town. Every traveler who pauses to notice the sunrise, every stranger who helps another on the road, every soul who walks not to escape the world, but to see it more clearly, continues that ancient tradition. The road itself may have changed, but the spirit of the pilgrim endures. If you listen closely, in the quiet of a country lane or along a path lined with wildflowers, you might still hear it. The faint echo of footsteps, the soft murmur of prayers, the whisper of wind over old stones. The world still remembers, the road still hums, and the pilgrim's story never really ends. There comes a time, after every long road, when the feet stop moving, when the body finally rests, and what remains is only stillness and memory. The 12th century pilgrim, having walked hundreds of miles through rain and sun, through hunger and song, now sits quietly beside a fire, the staff resting by their side. The cloak is worn thin, the shoes are frayed, but the eyes, those are calm, shining in the glow of the flames, because the pilgrimage, in truth, was never just about reaching a place. It was about becoming someone along the way. In that stillness, the pilgrim reflects. They remember the faces met on the road, a kind monk with warm bread, a child who waved from a window, a fellow traveler who shared stories under the stars. They remember nights spent listening to the wind against the walls of an old inn, mornings that began with mist rising from the fields. So many small, ordinary moments, and yet, together, they made something sacred. The world, once wide and frightening, now feels smaller, not because it has changed, but because they understand it better. Every path, every stream, every stone, all part of something vast and kind and endlessly alive. As the fire crackles softly, the pilgrim thinks of the road behind. How strange it was to begin it, unsure, afraid, carrying burdens both seen and unseen. How different it feels now, those burdens left behind in chapels and rivers and silent prayers whispered into the night. The heart that once trembled now beats quietly, steadily, peacefully sometimes. Neighbors or friends would ask returning pilgrims what they found on their journeys. They might expect tales of miracles or sights of distant lands, but most pilgrims smiled and said simply, "I found peace." And isn't that what every journey, every prayer, every sleepless night really searches for? Not riches, not glory, just that peace. In many villages, old pilgrims became storytellers. Children gathered near the hearth to hear their calm, wandering tales. Stories not of war or kings, but of walking and wonder, of kindness and silence. They spoke of roads where the sky seemed to go on forever, and chapels so small you could miss them if you blinked. Of nights when stars felt close enough to touch. Their voices were slow and steady, like footsteps echoing through time, and in their stories, the road lived on. Some never stopped walking, even after returning home. Not far, not to new lands, but simply out into the fields or woods each morning, just to hear the earth beneath their feet. Their neighbors would smile and say, "There goes the pilgrim again," and they would nod, quietly, with a half smile, as if to say, yes, the road still calls. Because once you've walked towards something holy, it's hard not to keep listening for it. In monasteries, monks wrote of pilgrims who came seeking forgiveness and who left with gentleness instead. One old monk wrote in his journal, "They arrive with restless hearts, but depart as rivers slow, sure, and full of peace." That line, copied centuries later, still feels true. There's a river that runs through all human journeys, and it always flows toward peace. Now imagine, for a moment, that it's you. You're the pilgrim. You've walked for days and nights, through forests and fields, through wind and stillness. Your shoes are dusty, your clothes smell faintly of smoke and rain. But ahead you see your home, its small roof glowing in the setting sun, the sound of a familiar door, the warmth of a room you've missed, the quiet joy of knowing you made it, not just there, but back again. You sit by the window, and the candlelight dances on the wall. You close your eyes and breathe in the peace you once went searching for, and you realize it was never really far away. Because maybe the true pilgrimage isn't the one that crosses mountains or seas. Maybe it's the one that happens in the heart. Every time we choose kindness over anger, patience over hurry, faith over fear. The 12th century pilgrims understood that, even if they couldn't put it into words. Their steps, slow, steady, hopeful, taught the world what it means to seek. So, as our story draws to a close, let's sit for a moment in that same quiet. Hear the soft rustle of a breeze through old trees. Smell the faint smoke of wood and wax. Feel the calm of the night settling around you. The road is behind us now. The journey is complete. And what's left is peace. Centuries have passed since those pilgrims walked the ancient roads. The world has changed beyond recognition. Cities have grown. Borders have shifted. Languages have evolved. But still, If you stand quietly on an old path at dawn, you might just hear it, the faint whisper of footsteps beneath your own. They're not ghosts, not really, just echoes, the quiet memory of thousands of souls who walked toward meaning. Some of those paths still exist. The Camino de Santiago winds through Spain, its stones worn smooth by 1,000 years of travelers. The Via Francigena still leads through the heart of Italy, past olive groves and ruins, to the ancient city of Rome. In England, pilgrims once walked from Winchester to Canterbury, singing songs that still sleep beneath the hedgerows. Modern shoes now tread those same trails, hiking boots, sneakers, even bare feet. The clothing is different, the faces are new, but the feeling, the quiet purpose, the rhythm of each step remains exactly the same. People today take pilgrimages for many reasons. Some still walk for faith, others walk to heal from loss. Some walk to find themselves again after the noise of the world becomes too loud. And when they do, they discover what the 12th century pilgrims already knew, that there's something sacred in the act of moving slowly, of leaving behind the rush and the noise, and letting each step become a prayer. On some roads, travelers still find old chapels standing by the wayside, their walls cracked, their bells long silent. Yet when the wind passes through the doorway, it sounds almost like singing. A few candles still burn in those places, wax dripping onto ancient stone. A modern pilgrim might kneel there, just for a moment, and whisper something soft, not always a prayer, sometimes just gratitude. The same gratitude a farmer felt in 1180, when he reached the shrine of St. James and saw the sea for the first time. The gratitude of a soul that knows it has come far enough to finally rest. In a way, we are all pilgrims now, not just those who walk across countries, but all who move through the days seeking peace, seeking purpose, seeking quiet in a restless world. Our roads may be paved, our maps lit by phone screens instead of stars, but the longing is the same. To find something still, something holy, somewhere inside the noise. If you close your eyes, you can imagine the medieval pilgrim walking beside you. Their pace is steady, their cloak whispering in the wind. You walk together for a while in silence, no need for words, because the journey has always spoken for itself. It says, you are not alone. It says, keep walking. It says, there is peace waiting for you, not at the end of the road, but in every quiet step along the way. When you sleep tonight, perhaps dream of those old roads, the candlelight of a wayside chapel, the murmur of a river under a wooden bridge, the sound of bells calling across a distant valley, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself walking again, one foot after another, through the soft dust of centuries, because the roads remember us. Every step leaves a trace. Every heart that seeks, every soul that hopes, adds another echo to the long, endless pilgrimage of humankind. So even as the night deepens, as the fire burns low and silence grows, know that your story too is part of that ancient journey, the one that began long before you were born, and will continue long after you are gone, a road that leads always toward understanding, toward peace, toward home. The road never ends. It only rests waiting for the next pilgrim to walk.